Hey, welcome back to another video. I'm Ivan Calderon, and today we're doing a beat breakdown. So I'm sure most of you already know of Kyle Beats. He's a really popular, pretty prominent producer here in the YouTube space, and he often does these contests for producers where you get to submit your own beats and then win some really cool prizes. Now, he just launched his brand new contest and I submitted a beat of my own, so I thought for this video, we could break down that beat and show you exactly how I made it. Really quickly before we get started, and I promise this will be worth your time, the beat that I submitted for this contest is gonna be linked down below in the description, so if you like what you hear today, it would mean a lot for me if you could click that link and give me an upvote. Voting for a beat does not guarantee a win. He still has to go through the submissions and pick his favorite, but it does guarantee exposure. Now, you might be thinking, well, Ivan, that's great, I'm doing all this for you, but what do I get out of it? Great question. So check this out. These are the prizes for the contest winners. Now in places 2 and 3, you do get some promotion on his channel and you get like his free plugin and some other stuff. But if you look over at place number 1, the number 1 winner for this contest also gets a pair of Atom Audio Studio monitors. I have no need for another pair of monitors here in the studio, so if I were to win those Atom Audio Studio monitors, I would just give them away to one of you guys. Again, voting does not guarantee a win, but the more votes it has, the more chances we have of Kyle seeing the beat. The beat, as mentioned, will be linked down below, so go ahead and upvote that, but without further ado, let's jump right in. But okay, jumping into Studio 1, this is the beat that I made. It's called Road Trip, and it has this very like pop-esque, very upbeat, ethereal kind of vibe, so let me just play it for you first. So as you can see, this beat is already fully arranged, and I am gonna go over the arrangement with you, but as far as the breakdown goes, let's start off with the chorus. Now the rules for this contest were that you had to download his latest sample loop pack, and then pick one of the samples there, and then make an original beat out of it. Now there were a lot of great samples in that pack, but I chose one called Off, and it's in F sharp major at 132 BPM. This is what it originally sounded like. Now I really like the feeling that I got from this sample, so I didn't change the key, and I also didn't change the BPM. I kind of kept it the same, but I still wanted to make it my own. So then what I did was I basically went in here and I manually chopped this sample up at the transients, so like right there, right there, right there, and I rearranged everything until I got my own version out of it, which was this. The processing for this sample was actually really crucial to get the vibe that I was looking for. So if we take away all the plugins, this is how the sample sounded like, at least my version of it, after I initially chopped it. So if you're noticing, there's a lot of low end there, and also in these little gaps where I chopped it up, it sounds a little bit empty. So to fix all of that, first I brought in an EQ and I removed a lot of the low end to cut off some of that and leave space for my own bass. And I also cut off a lot of the high end to push it to the back, make it sound a little bit more underwater. From there, I brought in some reverb from Valhalla, with those settings there, and then last but not least was an Echo Boy at a quarter note delay to kind of fill in these gaps and not make it feel so choppy. So again, the final result with all the plugins, all the processing, sounds like this. Now, once we had that, that was pretty much the foundation. So basically, my job was to build around this sample. And the first thing that I did was I found out the chords for me to layer more instruments on top of. And the first one that I brought in was a pad. Now, the pad without any effects on it sounds a little like this. Now that sounded good, but I wanted a little bit more movement, so I filtered out some of the high end and then I added a tremolator from Sound Toys with these settings here, and then we get this. And this pad is just playing the basic chords from this sample chop here. So once we add that back in, this is what we get. So from here, we had a pretty good standing melodically, so I went down to the drums, and the first ones that we started with, of course, were with a kick and a snare. Where is the snare? Right up here. And that's what this sounds like. Now, once this was done, I moved on to the hi-hats, and I actually had 3 of them. So if we take a look first, let me go ahead and just solo just the hi-hats. The first one that I brought in is this kind of like synthetic trap hat, and it sounds like this. Now, if you notice, there are some gaps here in this hat, and the reason for that is because this was the area where I wanted to pitch hi-hats up or down. Now, I could have sent this hat over to sample 1 and then pitched it there, but I thought instead what I would do to make it more interesting would be to introduce a whole new hi-hat with a new texture, with a new sound, and then use that for the pitched areas. So then if I bring in that second hat and the kick and the snare, this is what we get. Now at this point, I still wanted some more movement, so I brought in the third hat, which had a whole different texture, more lively sounding, and then I lowered the velocity of every other hat by 50%, and that creates this sound here. Now, if we were to bring back in the melodic elements to this beat, this is what that would sound like. Now, as far as the drums go, they sound great, and this could have been it, but I wanted to add little tidbits on top, little extra things here and there, just to make them a little bit more special. So the first extra thing that I added to my drums was a snap. Now the snap, you can see it here on the screen popping up. It comes in on every other snare. So that's a snare, that's a snare, that's a snare. It comes in on every other snare, and it sounds like this. If we go ahead and take a look at that snap, you'll see that I have a little bit of reverb from Valhalla, and then the real kicker here, what makes this really special, is that quarter note delay from Echo Boy. Moving on, the last 3 MIDI elements that I added to these drums was an open hat here that you can see on the screen, a crash to introduce some of the major sections, and then a perk here that you can see pop up. And this was actually a double hit, and much like with the snap, I added some reverb and then some Echo Boy, but this time at a half note delay, just to kind of fill things in a little more. And now we get this. To me, the drums at this point still needed a little bit more movement, so I brought in a shaker loop that I actually got from Splice, and this sounds like that. And then of course I also brought in a bass. Now for this I opted in for a more gritty bass instead of like an 808, and this is just basically following the root note for the chords that I played earlier on the pad, and this is what we get here. Little walk up at the end. And then it just repeats. So then if we put all the drums together, this is what we get. Now, one of the last things that I added to finish off the beat really was a bell, just to kind of add a little bit more of a top line. And that bell, I believe I got from Expand, but it sounds like this. I believe we also had a bit of a delay on it. Yeah, so we cut off some of the high end, added a half note delay, and then used wider to kind of spread it out a little bit. So then if we play the whole beat again, this is what we get. Okay, so let's talk about arrangement now. Now, if you've been watching me for a little bit, then you know that I like to start with my choruses first, and then I take things away to create other parts of the beat. Now, in this case, it was no different. Basically, I used the arranger tool here to create different sections, and for the intro, it was basically half the time of the chorus, and I brought over that sample, and then the pad, and that just sounds like this. Super, super simple, and then I also added a little cymbal riser towards the end just to introduce the chorus. Now from there, let's move on to the verse, because this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. Now, to me, a really good beat, a really engaging beat, is a beat that is dynamic, meaning that it's not monotone. It doesn't just stay the same, it takes you places. It takes you to places with high energy and then low energy. It takes elements away, it brings them back, it does all of that. If you take a look at my verses, the first thing that you'll see that I modified was my sample. Now the sample, if you notice, it has like these little bits in between, kind of like fillers. They're like piano fillers and they sound like this. And then, so then what I did was during the verses, I took those parts out, and it might sound subtle, but again, it's just about giving your ear something less or something more to be like, that's something different. So then for the verse, all we had was really just the main chops. A really important thing to note here is that the delay is really helping us out, because if I didn't have it there, it would just sound really like chopped up and weird. Take a listen. Nothing. Nothing. So that delay kind of glues everything together. Now continuing here with the melodic section, you'll see that I also removed the bells. The bells to me were just a top line that I only wanted on the chorus, so I did not include them in the verse. Now we'll talk about these guitars in a minute, but first, let's discuss some of this area here. Now a lot of people know that to add energy to a beat, you add things to it, but what a lot of people forget is that sometimes it's not about what you add, it's about what you take away and then maybe later reintroduce. Now, one of the ways that I love to do this is by going into the verse, removing the bass, and then altering the drums in some sort of way. Now, if you take a look at my arrangement here, I took out the bass for the first couple measures, beginning in the verse, and then I also took out the shaker loop, and I even modified the hi-hats. Now for this little brief area here, I did keep that third live sounding chug hat just to continue to give this beat some movement, but I did remove that second pitched hat, and then for my main hat, which was the main driver, it went from this to something a little bit more laid back. Now again, this little area here is very brief, but it's enough to give the listener an idea that something has changed because the energy shifts. First you were up here in the chorus, then you come down here in the beginning of the verse, and then you slightly come back up. So take a listen to the transitions between the chorus into the verse, and then back into this little portion. Energy comes down. Everything is more laid back. And then we're right back to the same drums from the chorus. Okay, so midway through the verse, I decided to switch things up again, and let me tell you how I did it. Now this time around, it wasn't so crazy with the drums. All I did was remove the kick, but I did introduce a new melodic element, and those were guitars. Now the guitars basically picked notes that follow the same main chord progression from the pad and the sample, and what I basically did was I recorded it twice, and then panned one hard left and one hard right, and this is what that sounds like. And then for that, we have a little bit of an EQ here. Then we have some reverb. We have some delay at a quarter note. And then we also have a little bit of saturation from Decapitator. So then once you add those guitars into the mix, this is what we have going on. Now, to be quite honest with you, I'm still kind of like halfway stuck with these guitars because half of me says they sound really good, and then the other half thinks they kind of clash with the samples. So I don't know. You let me know. What do you think? Do they clash? Do they fit? Let me know in a comment down below. Anyway, the last part of this verse, which I think is worth mentioning, is the ending, because as you can see, towards maybe like the last couple measures, I brought the kick back in, but then right before we go back into the chorus, I dropped some things out again. So if you take a look here, about 2 measures before we go back into the chorus, I dropped out the shaker loop and all of the hi-hats. And again, this is just simply to reduce the energy very briefly to let you know something different is coming up and then deliver you right back into the chorus. So let's take a listen to that transition real quick. Everything drops. Right back into it. And again, we know that this is the chorus, this is the main part, because of those bells that are only present in the chorus. Now, as far as the rest of the arrangement goes, it's really just duplicates of each section to create a song, but the one part that is different is this breakdown, so let's talk about it. Now, towards the end of like the second verse, I included this little breakdown piece, and basically, this is a chorus without drums. Take a listen. And then we bring the drums back in to create the actual chorus. Now, obviously, this was just a creative choice, but I wanted to give the listener a sense of the chorus without fully getting that entire impact, and then bring everything back in at the end. And there you have it. That was the breakdown to my submission for the Kyle Beats contest. But that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, like this video if you like to, subscribe if you're not already, but I will see you on the next one.